All right, everyone. So I'm here with Alexa Bunting, who is a former student of mine and now a current senior marketing manager at PF Chang's. I think I got that right. She's nodding, so that's good. So, Alexa, if you would, thank you for being with us, but if you would just sort of introduce yourself and tell us about your position and sort of what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So super excited to be here today. I started my career in sales actually, and I really became interested in kind of the psychology behind, why people were coming in and how I was able to achieve this sale, which got me to go back to school at UWA to get my master's in integrated marketing communications. So love taking courses with you. And then I dove into the marketing world, really concentrating in it, starting in kind of this tech firm first. So it was a Microsoft partner selling these or marketing these tech products. We basically did services as far as teaching corporate entities different Microsoft technologies. So I had to make technology fun. And then I ended up going into Black Rifle Coffee as their retail marketing manager, kind of overseeing all of their retail marketing for their 40 locations at the time, both franchise and corporate operated. And now I am over at PF Chang's, leading integrated marketing and brand, reporting directly into the CMO. So we have over 200 locations in the US and some globally. I'm in charge of the domestic side of things.
Right. So, what does the everyday sort of look like for you in that current role? We're going to talk about professional communication, obviously, but sort of in what you're doing kind of on the day to day, obviously it changes, right? But so, what's that look like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that I was able to incorporate with my role at PF Chang's is, from start to finish, integrated marketing and what that really encapsulates for us. And so we started doing these integrated campaign decks from start to finish with the team. So essentially we do a 360 slide at the beginning of the presentation. We always go over what are the different elements of the campaigns and what each channel is going to be doing on their part of the campaign. So really being able to incorporate that process has been amazing. And just from day to day, I'm managing our PR, I'm managing our paid media, overseeing all of campaign execution, ideation, basically from start to finish. So got to be involved in a little bit of everything.
Right. It keeps you on your toes, keeps you busy, which we always
Exactly.
enjoy, right?
Yeah.
So in the context of this course on professional communication, you as the working professional in the field are obviously experiencing this day to day, right? But in your sort of own words, what does professional communication mean to you specifically in your role sort of as a senior manager at this point, right? What does that mean to you in terms of your job and how professional communication comes across in your workplace?
Yeah, so something really important that I've learned is you have to be extremely concise with the way you're delivering your message, and you really have to cater your message depending on your audience as well. So, day to day, I'm in front of people, I'm presenting, whether it be remote or next week. I also have a market partner meeting that I'm going to be presenting for along with the C suite members. So, just being able to understand your audience and cater your message just depending on who you're going to be in front of is really important. And that's something that, as I've grown in my career, it's been something that I've had to learn, and then also something that I've been able to implement.
So, in what you were just mentioning, in working with all these different audiences and different target
Yeah.
groups, how do you sort of navigate the communication that you do in your current job in communicating with the C-suite of the organization versus like, your public facing audience, your consumer audience? How do you sort of navigate the differences in that type of communication?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. You always kind of have your internal briefing, your internal deck, and communication between all the C-suite members. So what I do with the team is we put together, a deck that really goes into every single aspect of the campaign. Again, starting with that 360 integrated marketing slide and then breaking it out by channel. But that's something really that we talk through as a team that wouldn't see the public, that wouldn't be in the public eye. So we do it
Mhm.
as a team first. We make sure that we are each understanding each component. And then before I present to the C suite, we take it a step back and we simplify it extremely to kind of the key components. You want to have, your executive level slide that really starts off the gate really strong. That way you can kind of give them an overview. Executives, they want something quick, easy to understand, and concise. So you really have to go at the beginning with something that's going to be heavy hitting. So we always make sure keep it really condensed, concise, Typically, I like to keep decks down to about five-ish slides for executives, just because, again, they don't have a lot of time. And when you have them in the room, it's a real opportunity to make sure that they're aligned with what you're doing. And so essentially that's what we do. As a team, we have a bigger conversation. We narrow it in for executives. And then when it's ready to go public facing, that's when we pull those components out from our internal deck. Like, for instance, we want to go over a press release. So we have that part in our internal deck. Then we prepare it for the public and we get it ready to go with our PR team. And then that's what's public facing. That's what consumers want to see, as well as, some of our initial ideas and bringing it to life on social media, things of that nature. So there's really kind of a few different processes and a few different phases that go into, launching a campaign, really.
Right. And so when you are also, preparing these slides for internal or external audiences, whomever, you mentioned sort of the teamwork dynamic of all this. It's not just you working in a silo on all this. So can you talk a little bit about how the team dynamic comes into play when you're putting these type of things together and what that sort of structure looks like for you guys?
Yeah, and I think that's something that's really important as well, and maybe something that at the start of my career I didn't have as much experience in as I do now, is really working with cross-functional partners. And that's something in everyday life you're going to have to get used to, is talking to people that maybe don't understand marketing. And so what I tell my team is, like, at the end of the day, we're here to tell a story and we have to sell it. So we have to put on other people's hats of what are they doing in their job and how would they think about it. So one example is, for instance, if I'm launching something from a marketing perspective, we also have an operations team and a culinary team. They're going to think about it from an execution standpoint of how are their restaurant operators going to be able to support this. And so what I do when I present it is, hey, here's what we're thinking about from a marketing perspective. Where do you see gaps? Where am I not thinking? Because at the end of the day, I don't have all the answers, but I want their partnership to be able to have, a seamless campaign launch. So you do have to make sure that you're open and you're available to receive feedback, and also, get questions answered, go out there. Don't be afraid to ask for differing opinions, because that's what makes your pitch stronger.
How do you navigate a situation, or have you had this experience where there's been a sense of conflict or differences of opinion on materials that you're putting together or campaigns that you're working on? And how do you sort of navigate that dynamic when maybe everyone's not on the same page that you think they should be?
Yeah. So one example I always kind of like to mention is we did a Freakier Friday partnership with Disney, which was really exciting and fun. And it was something that we had never done before, where it was bright colors. It was super, it was fun. It was lively. And a lot of the times our colors are very dark, and, we're more of that nighttime vibe of PF Chang's. And so it was a little different than what we're normally used to. But what I was able to do to kind of get this to the forefront, get this considered by the executives, was I took a step back and I said, okay, what are our competitors doing? And sometimes that's what you have to do, is you have to come to the table with facts and research back data of why you think this is going to work. So that's what I was able to do, is kind of pull different trends. At the time, I think it was like Sonic and Chick-fil-A were launching all of these bright, fun refreshers. Refreshers were, really hitting off for the summer. And so that was something we really wanted to be a part of, and that we couldn't miss out from a trend perspective. So I was able to bring that trend data, and as well as a few different competitor examples, and present it to the team and get their buy-in that way.
When you're making those sort of data informed decisions, right? I think that's one thing that's super vital, whether you're speaking to executives or to consumer facing campaigns or whatever it is. The data that you're using to inform those decisions is probably the most critical aspect that you can use, right? How do you what do you look for when you're doing that sort of market research? Like, if, for example, if you're looking at your competitors, or if you're trying to launch a new product or a new campaign, how do you go about that sort of research process to sort of make those data informed decisions?
Yeah, so it's definitely a team effort. Once again, I kind of open it up to the team and say, hey, what are you guys seeing? I think one part of it is that you have to be really into pop culture and what's going on. I personally don't like to be on social media all the time, but I have to be because of my job, and understanding, okay, what's relevant right now in pop culture. And then also, okay, using data sources, like for instance, if there's a resource that your team has with something like Technomic, they pull restaurant data, they pull trends. So being able to use a research database like that has been super helpful. So I think it's twofold. You have to have sort of this research database, or, in this instance for students, if they have a scholarly database where they can pull from, and then also just have that relevance with pop culture as well. So I think it's twofold there.
Just be perpetually online is what we're saying. Yeah. Right. Um,
Exactly.
yeah. So let's tie it back to the idea of presenting. And you've touched on this already a bit about being concise and being very clear with your messaging, especially when you're pitching to someone like the C-suite, right? How do you go about the idea of pitching an idea to maybe your managers or to the C-suite? And what sort of process do you go through? Um, to pitch a new idea or to pitch an idea for a campaign, and what does that look like for you when you're actually presenting that to sort of upper leadership?
Yeah. So I think first and foremost, one of my most favorite things to do is I gather my employees together and we have an initial brainstorming session. And so we kind of just get all of our thoughts out there, make sure that we are all having fun with it. And then from there, we start having separate kind of one off conversations about those ideas that really attracted us and that we feel like we can really put something behind. And then from there, I put together a full campaign pitch deck of, okay, here's, the idea here. Here's the reasons to believe this is why we think we should do this. And then I also love to include, here's some competitor examples. Here's what some others are doing in the industry. And then kind of give them a glimpse if I can. I'm in charge of the creative team as well. So that comes in handy because I can say, hey, can you kind of drum up what this may look like? And so that way I can give a sense of what I'm trying to achieve and allow them to kind of step into the campaign and imagine what it could be for us. So I think once you get to that point where you have some visuals, I think it's very important to have visual examples, maybe even if it's you don't have a creative team at your disposal, just providing relevant images that could make someone feel like they're a part of it. And so that's what you really want to keep in mind. And then from that point, just being prepared to get in front of them and answer their questions. And then also knowing that not everyone may be on the same page as you, and you might have to sell it a little bit harder. There's people of all ages that you have to talk to. So some people might not be as in the know as others, and you kind of have to be prepared to give background to of where you're coming from.
So clearly in that process, there can be a sense of rejection, right? Not every pitch is going to be successful. Not every idea is going to launch. How do you navigate that sort of rejection, that initial sort of, oh no, they didn't like my idea? How do you sort of manage that? Because I know for a lot of people, that's really nerve wracking, right? To sort
Yeah.
of face that rejection. So how do you sort of process through that?
Yeah, so I think it's one thing that hinders a lot of marketers and a lot of communicators is being afraid to fail. And that's one piece of advice that I would give anyone kind of starting their marketing career is don't be afraid to fail because, some of the best ideas come from failures. And I've had that happen before where, something was rejected, but then I kind of took it back to the team and I said, hey, they weren't about this idea. And we came back with something even better. So it's just, letting it fuel you for the next thought and not seeing it as, oh, it's just no. And that's kind of how I think is it's like, it's a no right now, but it's not a full no because now I can take this back and say, okay, well, what was it that they didn't like? Okay, let's lean into those things that they liked from this idea or this pitch, and then let's build on that and figure out what we can do, and then everybody wins.
I think that's great. It's the idea of sort of failing upward, right? I mean, not every failure is a stopping point. It's just something to help move you forward, right? So that's a really good sort of philosophy there. Um, so you obviously work with a sort of diverse team, of people in different sort of backgrounds and things. Is there anything, with communicators or your sort of contemporaries that are working in your same space? Or is there anything that you're seeing, particularly maybe in younger employees, that maybe missing or maybe a gap in either their understanding of the communications or marketing process or in soft skills or interpersonal skills? Is there anything there that you're noticing with this new sort of generation of employees coming out? I mean, again, we're all still fairly young in this game, but or at least I can act like it. But is there anything that you're noticing in that group? Because I think there's a really interesting shift that's happened in workplace culture with this sort of Gen Z
Yeah.
and almost Gen Alpha, resurgence in the workplace. Are you seeing any gaps there?
I will say that's a great question. And I think one of the main things that I kind of see in that sense is people that are afraid to really communicate or be a part of the conversation, and more so kind of reserved in the sense of maybe not being as willing to speak up or not being as willing to raise a hand or kind of make that call. And so I think I would just encourage those who are younger, you know, not like every idea is, I wouldn't say good idea, but it can get us somewhere to where it's a good idea. So don't be afraid to give your input, because I think that's what keeps, marketing and communications, that's what keeps it ever evolving and fresh, is having that new insight and those new ideas. So I think that's one thing that I see is holding a lot of younger people back, is they're afraid to have those conversations, or they're afraid to speak up. And then also just having that personal ability to conversate with someone, making eye contact. I've noticed that's kind of fallen back a little bit to the wayside with the rise of
Mhm.
social media. So I would just challenge those that are kind of getting into their career to make sure to set aside time to have those conversations with people, look people in the eye, shake their hand. That's something that I'm really big on, is still shaking everyone's hands when I meet them, and, introducing myself, looking them in the eye, making sure they know who I am. And the more you show up, the more, opportunities you're going to have. And that's another part of it too, is you sometimes may have to volunteer for opportunities that are outside of your job description, but that's what takes you to the next level. And that's what gives you, it might put you in an area where you're uncomfortable, but that's what gets you to that point in your career where you can grow and expand. So at the end of the day, don't be afraid.
I tell people all the time, it's about, if nothing else, putting on a persona when you're
Yeah.
at work and when you're doing the thing to sort of put yourself out there. You can be the most introverted person in the world, but if you have to act in that room and be in that room and take up space in that room, put on that persona, act like you know what you're doing, because that's half the battle, half the time. Um,
And notice too, the more people you talk to, again, everyone's just trying to do their best at the end of the day. So that's what you have to go into those rooms and those meetings thinking, is they're all trying to do their best just like me. And, at the end of the day, if I say something and it doesn't go over well, I'm going to learn from it. So it kind of takes that nervousness off the table, and you just go in and, make it work.
that's great. Yeah, we're gonna go off script a little bit. I didn't send you this question, but I'm just
That's
curious, how has AI impacted your job? Because I know we keep hearing all the time that AI is taking our jobs, and it's going to
fine.
replace the humans and everything, particularly in marketing and creative spaces. I think people are having those conversations. So, is AI impacting your day to day in a positive or a negative way, or anything like that?
So I think it's a little bit of both, honestly, because then you have kind of these outside perspectives of, hey, AI can do this or it can do that. It can make us copy, it can make us photos. It can't do, at the end of the day, what a human can do. And I will say that's something that I feel very strongly about. And at PF Chang's, we have a human copywriter, that it's night and day difference. I absolutely can tell when AI writes copy and when it doesn't. And so I think we're safe at the end of the day. Like, us creatives, there's something that a machine can't do. And I think especially when you look at copywriting, you have the ability to really resonate with consumers and get into this brand voice, and things, that little nuanced things or little jokes or things that the AI wouldn't know or wouldn't understand about the brand. So there's always going to be that gap that I think a computer can't fill. I will say, from a day-to-day perspective, it does help in the sense of, like, if you need a jumping off point, but never, I would encourage people to never use it as a end all be all. If you need help in a brainstorming session, I think that's where it kind of comes into play of, like, hey, let's start a brainstorming session. Let's get a couple prompts to kick us off. But I never use it to be the final, component of whatever I'm doing. And so I think that's something that I would just encourage as well, is, like, you can use it for a jumping off point for inspiration, but never use it as the final. And, being a creative person, I think you really need to just trust yourself in the process, because there's something that AI won't be able to replace, and that's individual creativity. So, and I feel very strongly about that.
And it's good to hear coming from someone that's not on the faculty side, because I think we're telling the students that all the time, but actually hearing it come from the employees is great. I
Yeah.
think they need to hear that. So, in thinking about, again, sort of broader communications and skill sets and sort of starting out in your career, what do you think is the main skill that students need to focus on? Or what do you think is like the thing that has been the most important aspect, from your education or from your experience, a skill what is that thing that you think students should put a little bit more emphasis on, maybe if they're not, to sort of make them or get them ahead?
Yeah, I there's a few different points that I'd like to make for that one. I think one that things that comes to mind for me is personal branding and creating a personal image. LinkedIn has been a really great tool and resource for myself, and I think that's somewhere, especially now with the digital age, kind of getting on there and posting, about what you're doing, about what you're working on. It's really great for other professionals to connect and kind of inspire each other there. So I think, creating that personal brand for yourself, making sure people are kind of seeing you for who you are and in your field and who your personality is, letting that kind of shine through is very important. And then I think also, it's kind of broad, but communication in general, being able to kind of, as I mentioned earlier, cater your message depending on your audience has been one of my number one things that really has worked for me. And again, it kind of comes from that sales mindset too of, how can I sell this to someone? You have to put on that person's hat and say, well, how would they think about it? And I will say one thing that I do is if I know that I'm pitching to someone new or typically I do this with, kind of C-suite level executives, people that have been in the industry for a while. I'll go and research them and listen to some of their interviews or their podcasts and kind of prepare myself to think, okay, how are they thinking about this? What would their potential response be? And I think that's something that's really important that maybe not a lot of people do is kind of, okay, who is my audience? And like, let's research them. And so that way I'm not going in blind to the presentation. And then the last thing I would say is connection building and being in front of people. Like I said, going into rooms, having conversations, shaking people's hands, and making sure they see you and stepping up and having those conversations and not being able to fail and make those connections is really important.
I think that is something that's really interesting to think about, because even just in sort of day-to-day communication, if you are interacting with someone new or someone who is important, these sort of very important people, it's
Yeah.
always good to know who you're working with and who you're talking to and how they talk. Because again, the best thing you can do is to help people, think that an idea was theirs, because they're
Mm-hmm.
already going to have buy-in, right? And so, but you're not going to be able to do that until you've researched them pretty extensively to know how they speak and know how they talk. So I think that's really good. And again, I don't think people are doing that as much as they could these days. So that's really cool. Any sort of final thoughts on professional communication or advice you want to give to students entering the workforce on how to maybe communicate more professionally or succeed in these first roles?
Yeah, just get yourself out there as much as you can, and don't be afraid if you're looking at jobs. Don't be afraid to apply to something even if you don't hit every single mark. I think that's one thing that I've seen a lot from the younger generation as well, is they immediately see a job description and they're like, "Well, I don't have this experience, so I'm not going to get it." Again, you're the marketer, sell your experience and sell the reason why you think that you'd be a good fit at this job and communicate to that person of why you can do these things, because you never know, they might be willing to take a chance. And don't be afraid to put yourself out there. Again, get in those conversations, make sure people know, your opinion or your thoughts. And like I said, just don't be afraid to fail. It's you'll learn a lot and you'll grow a lot.
I think that's a really great way to end this. I think a lot of times that fear of failure is what holds people back, and
Yeah,
it's fear of rejection, it's fear of failing, it's fear of humiliation to some extent, right? When I think at the end of the day, like you said earlier, we're all trying our best, and
exactly.
so I think put yourself out there, try your best, and do so professionally, right? I think that's
Exactly.
a great way. Well, Alexa, this has been great. Thank you so much for taking the time. And again, it's always great to hear from professionals who are saying the exact same thing that we are in the classroom, thankfully. But just having it from the professional aspect is really great. So this has been great, and I'll touch base with you soon.
Absolutely. Thank you
All right.
so much. It's been
All right.
wonderful.
All right. Have a good
Thank
one. All right, bye.
you.